Welcome to In the Margins. I'm your host, Ralph Newell, and today's guest is Dr. Monica Parrish Trent, Chief Program and Network Officer at Achieving the Dream. For those you don't know, that Achieving the Dream was founded to close achievement gaps and accelerate student success nationwide by guiding institutional change, influencing public policy, generating knowledge, and engaging the public. Welcome, Dr. Trent.
Thank you so much for having me, Ralph. And please call me Monica. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Okay, Monica. I know we were just talking about George Mason prior to getting started. So it's tournament time
Yes.
for the NCAA men's and women. So you went to George Mason University undergrad, and they were one of the original Cinderella teams. So
My goodness.
how did you feel as an alumni at that time when that was going on, when they were in the Final Four?
So that was such an exciting time for us. Being a George Mason student who lived on campus, I was in the Patriot Center a lot, and I was one of the students who lived on campus in the 80s and 90s. It was primarily a commuter school, but that meant the athletes were there. And so we were connected to the athletes then. And when we saw that they were a Cinderella story, it was just something that was so rewarding, because I can remember some of the students that were athletes back in the day who came from DC and all parts of Virginia. Mm-hmm. And at George Mason, a lot of them were doing either basketball or track, both girls and boys. And that was their ticket for a higher education, right? They were getting those scholarships that was paying their entire tuition. And otherwise, they might not have been able to get a college education. And so that was my original framing, I would say, for college sports. Mm-hmm. However, I'm the proud mom of two boys, one 21, one 24, and my husband, and they are sport junkies. They'll watch anything competitive. And so when George Mason was, in the Sweet 16, they lost their mind. So it was very exciting for us.
Yeah, I mean, they went beyond the Sweet 16. If I'm not mistaken, they got to the championship game. So it was definitely and a good occasion. And I went there because, like I said, I was reading your bio and I saw that you went to George Mason, and I, like I said, heard it earlier in the week. And I see that you were an English major, and that hits home for me because my youngest daughter, she's an English major currently at Northern Virginia Community College, and she plans to transfer to Santa Clara University out in California when she finishes. And her plan, again, like I said, is to major in English. So I've been asking her, like, okay, what are your plans with this English degree? I just want her to get a degree. So honestly, I don't care too much of what it's in, but I want her thinking about her career. So I'm definitely going to point her towards you as a career inspiration. Okay, this is what this person did with her English degree.
Yes.
So in your case, why English for you?
Such a great question. So I actually started George Mason wanting to be Connie Chung. So, in the 80s, there weren't a lot of diverse female broadcast journalists. There was Connie Chung and there was Jane Kennedy and a few others. And so that's what I thought I wanted to do, because I enjoy conversation around what's happening in society and what's happening with the human condition. And when I started taking the communication studies classes, they just weren't that engaging. It might have been the technical pieces of it. Mm-hmm. But I was also taking English classes and English literature classes, and our book of the year was Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye. And I had the distinct honor of having that class with an African-American female professor who was relatively young, kind of a fairly new doc student. And the way she unpacked that novel for me was eye-opening. It was prolific, and it really helped me to see how literature and history and the past and culture and community can inform the way you think about the human condition and what's happening from a societal lens. And I liked the courses, so that's what made me switch to becoming an English major. And I actually got my undergrad in English writing and my master's in English teaching composition and literature. And one of the things that I tell people about being an English major in the 80s and 90s at George Mason, especially if you were African-American, we would hang out in the Black Peer Counseling Office, and Frank Matthews would come in with Dr. Smith, who was the head of the BPC. So he was kind of a student affairs senior director. Mm-hmm. And he would come in and he'd say, "Where are the English majors?" And, here I am. And he gave us some of the scripts from the early editions of when it was Black issues in higher education and say, "Edit this for me." So I was a student assistant in the office, and that's how I first started learning how to copy edit and really began thinking about, well, there is still a journalistic aspect of being an English major and the critical thinking. And so for me, it was such a great experience. I was able to combine literature, also learning about society from the lens of Black issues in higher ed specifically, and really thinking about what was happening in the world in the late 80s.
Okay. And for those you don't know, Frank Matthews that she's referencing is one of the founders of Diverse. Frank was the publisher, but at that time, early on, he was wearing two hats, working at George Mason and putting out Black issues in higher ed. So, wow, thanks for that connection. So, when you were talking about the class time, was Marianne Mobley one of your teachers back then, or was she?
She's the professor I'm telling you about.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Dr. Marilyn Mobley. Yes, yes, yes. I took every class she taught from the moment I met her, all of the classes. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, no, she's definitely a good friend to me, a good friend to Diverse. So sounds like had an impact on your career as well.
Absolutely.
You talked about Toni Morrison. Who is your favorite writer, living or deceased?
Living or deceased. So I am a fan of Toni Morrison. I'm also a fan of a local writer, Marita Golden, who lives in D.C. She was also a professor at George Mason. I love her work. I'm reading some of Jesmyn Ward. I find her work to also be really strong and compelling. I like James Baldwin. I like, I like some of the Southern writers. I really like Flannery O'Connor and some of her short stories. So there are a number of writers I enjoy.
Okay. All right. Now you're talking about prolific people. How about smut? You got any smut writers? No, I'm just kidding.
When I was a young girl, who didn't read the Harlequin romances because they were
right.
your 5 and dime was for like 50 cents. So I read a couple of them.
Exactly. But no, I mean, obviously, it definitely has had an impact on your life and shaped your career. And so at some point after you graduated, whether it be undergrad or getting your master's, you got into teaching English in community colleges. How did that happen?
So it's funny you should ask that. It happened because when I was in my last semester at George Mason as a grad student, I was complaining that we weren't allowed to be the TAs, the teacher assistants in the program that I was in because we weren't Masters of Fine Art students. And so I complained that the MFAs had all of the TA assignments and many of them wanted to be poets. And I was actually in the program, English teaching composition and literature. And so some of my classmates said, Monica, you have 18 credits in English. So that means that you can teach at Northern Virginia Community College because you have 18 credits in the master's. And so from there, I applied to NOVA and I was able to get a job with support of my advisor so that I got credits and I was able to teach a class. And when I did that, I was able to get my first experience at NOVA, and I absolutely loved it. I taught a 7:30 a.m. class. No one wants to teach 7:30. A brand new teacher, but I had the department chair from NOVA and I had my advisor both as mentors, and I never looked back. It was an incredible experience. And so after I got my master's degree and I had that one class, I was looking for jobs and looking for doc programs, and Brookdale Community College, where I had my first full-time position, they were retiring high and hiring low. And so they had a program to hire new teachers who had less than 3 years teaching experience. So I had one semester. I was going to be rock bottom in terms of the pay scale. And I fit the profile and I got the job. And I had wonderful mentors there and just really loved it. I kind of fell into this career and, have never looked back.
Okay, so you fell into it, but if you hadn't have fallen into it, where do you think you would have been or like to have been?
I think once I learned that it wasn't going to be Connie Chung, I would say something that was around having conversations about justice and equity in society. And so whether that would have been a career in law or would have been a career as a social worker, it would have been something in that space because that was what was most interesting to me then and now. I really am fascinated by the implications of society on individuals, especially particular groups of individuals that are racially or ethnically minoritized, poverty impacted, justice impacted. that is what kind of feeds my soul and fuels my interest in the work that I do. And it connects to community college students as well, because oftentimes they're the first in their generation to be able to earn a college degree or credential. And oftentimes they're poverty impacted, and there's no roadmap for how to get this done. And they really need the community college to support them along that journey. So I'd be in that space.
Yeah, no, I mean, great answer. And, you kind of sort of dovetailed it into exactly to where I was going as to, it sounds like, what your goals and aspirations were, you actually have found it in the work that you guys do at Achieving the Dream. And for those in the audience that really don't know about Achieving the Dream and the work that you're doing, could you tell us more about Achieving the Dream and why it is that community colleges seek to work with you all?
Sure. So as you mentioned in the opening, Achieving the Dream is a national nonprofit in the reform movement in higher education. And we've been in existence since 2004. And we began as an initiative that really wanted to focus on closing equity gaps for community college students. And we've expanded and probably defined what we mean by equity over time to really reflect who today's community college students are. But when we think about that, we think about students who are parenting. We think about students who are first generation. We think about students who are multilingual. We think about students who are working multiple jobs and have a lot of other commitments besides being students. And, if you think about the fact that most community college students, nearly 70% are part-time, right? 30% of community colleges students work, and they work more than 30 hours, right? And so they are part-time, they're employed, and they have complicated lives. Those are the students that we really wanted to support at Achieving the Dream, and support them by really expanding what people know about their students. So if you don't know the complexity of their lives, you don't know the supports that they need. If you don't understand how it is that they culturally come in contact with information and how that information is disseminated and used to advance learning, then you're not able to really support them in the ways that they need in order for them to be successful. And so Achieving the Dream focuses on community colleges in particular, and the students that are in community colleges, like I said, that are largely racially and ethnically diverse and have complex lives in terms of working, caregiving, and are also part-time. And so we really wanted to look at what are the supports and services that they need in order to be successful. And that's really coaching in general to help colleges understand their data, both qualitative data and quantitative data, so they can know who their students are, understand their systems and their structures, so that once they see something that's a barrier or a blockage, they can get involved in the design thinking and the systems thinking and redesign that's necessary to really address those issues that are oftentimes contributing factors to equity gaps. And so the work that we do in Achieving the Dream is really partnering with colleges, especially community colleges, to know their students, to remove the roadblocks that oftentimes we put in place ourselves, because we know that the higher education system was not necessarily designed for these students.
Right.
And to work with them to really support the students on their journey from being brought to the community college from wherever they are in their community, all the way through their educational journey and into careers with living, sustaining wages. And that last part is critical, because if students leave in debt and in careers that don't pay living, sustaining wages, we have impacted the issues that we were trying to help them overcome with closing equity gaps, and that justice part of the work that we're doing.
Now, are you guys, you kind of alluded to that you're not, but just want to clear it up for folks. You're not exclusive for community colleges. You also do work with other types of institutions, right?
Yes. So the primary audience that we have are the nation's community colleges. However, we do work with tribal colleges and universities. When we began working with them in 2017, it was nearly all of the TCUs in the United States were working with us through a partnership. We also support colleges in South Africa, and so they are part of the university system in South Africa. And we also have supported some four-year institutions through our work with other partnerships in spaces that support work around students, but these students happen to be in not just community colleges, they can be in HBCUs, HSIs, MSIs, and other types of institutions that award the associate's and or the baccalaureate degree.
Okay. It's sort of interesting or ironic that you mentioned South Africa because at your conference this year, earlier, I guess that was in February.
February, yes.
I met a number of people at our booth that were from South Africa. So yeah, okay. And you just mentioned, when I think about the profile of the students that you guys work with, and one of the, if you want to get granular, is that you guys serve Native Americans. So
Yes.
Achieving the Dream has been at the forefront working with tribal colleges and universities, specifically with initiatives to support student-centered transformation at these institutions. So what exactly are those initiatives, and are they unique to tribal schools, or can they be transferred to other MSIs or mainstream institutions?
Yes, that's a great question. And so we've been working with tribal colleges and universities through a partnership with the American Indian Higher Education Consortium and the American Indian College Fund, along with philanthropy and support from the Department of Education through something called Project Success. And that began in 2017 with us working with these tribal colleges around leadership and data capacity building. And so we had coaches that were going out to the TCUs, getting to understand their culture, their climate, their history, their ways of knowing, and thinking about how do we use all of that rich cultural information to support them with meeting their goals, but also kind of the system improvements that they were seeking so that they could serve their students in ways that would make it easier for them to really understand who they are. And just like any other institution, identify the barriers and remove them. And so the work that we've done with our tribal colleges and universities has been through our Foundations of Transformation experience. That's the initial 3-year experience. We do that with all of our colleges coming in the network. They may be a TCU, an HSI, an MSI, or a rural serving institution. And we adapt that program to the conditions of the college.
Okay.
They've also participated in our holistic student supports program. And that really is looking at the intersection between what happens in the classroom and life that happens around the classroom. So really working with counseling and advising to understand what's happening in a student's life and what are the conditions that are going to make a student likely persist and be retained and earn their degree, and the conditions that are going to keep students from being able to do that. And some of these conditions are whether or not they have the money for childcare, whether or not their employer is going to let them take the classes at the times that they've registered, even if they had a commitment from the employer, whether or not there's a transportation issue and the student doesn't have reliable transportation, whether or not it's last minute emergency and the student is about to be evicted or their car is about to be repossessed, right? So, and that holistic student supports, we're looking at the systems, the structures, the processes, the attitudes, and things that happen in any campus community, be it a TCU or a local community college that is an HBCU or an MSI, and really thinking about how do we integrate the supports inside and outside the classroom, to include academic support such as enrichment, tutoring, and, I mentioned the Black Peer Counseling Office at George Mason, right? So those kinds of supports that help students stay connected to one another and stay on the path to earning their degree.
Okay. Working with the tribal colleges, is there anything that you guys have learned that you wouldn't have known if it wasn't for working with TCUs that, you've now transferred to others?
Yes, I say we've learned a lot. And one of the benefits of being and achieving the dream is that we are a network that really prides itself on peer learning. So it's what our colleges learn from one another, what our coaches learn from our colleges, and what our coaches share with our colleges. And one of the things that we've learned in working with tribal communities is not that we didn't have a basic understanding of the importance of culture and heritage and community, but it's helped us to think more about sense of belonging and cultural competency and cultural assets as a source of wealth and a student's learning experience. And so when I think about some of the learnings that we've had over the years and some of the speakers that we brought in to really help all of us understand what is important to retain when you're working with a student, be it a native student at a TCU or a native student at another type of institution, is the importance of history, culture, community, and land. And so one of the things that I remember really clearly in having a conversation with one of our TCU employees is that, you know, when our students learn, and they're talking about their students, native students, they respect what they hear in the classroom in that they hear it and they process it.
Mm-hmm.
But many of them will take it to an elder and have that conversation about, can you please put it in the context of what an elder would say or feel or do? And that solidifies the learning. So for me, that is such a profound example of what we've learned about the ways in which culture informs knowledge, how knowledge is shared and how knowledge is absorbed.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that is profound. I never thought about it, taking it that far, but if you're being holistic, that totally makes sense. At the time of this interview that we're talking today, we are at the tail end of Women's History Month. And I saw some interesting data on your website that 55% of the women in community colleges, 55% of the students in community colleges are women. A third of them are mothers, and 60% of them are single mothers. And that's a lot. So I had to break it down so that I could understand it better. So basically, that equates to 11% of all community college students are single mothers.
Yes.
And to me, that's a staggering number. And you talked about helping parents. So, in reading your bio, I see that this probably actually hits home for you that, you know, you were raised in a single parent household by a mother who was working to earn her degree, you said, your entire life. And you learned early on the power of opportunity, perseverance, and education. So with that, you know, you say you do this work in your mother's honor and memory. So tell us a bit more about ATD's work in supporting the parenting student.
Thank you for that question. And so you spoke beautifully to it. The data is compelling. So 1 in 5 students is raising a child while attending school. And then we know that half of those students, or a little more than half of them, are raising children under the age of 6. And when I think about my mom and my first community college experience, it was really at Burlington County Community College in New Jersey, where I grew up, because she had no choice but to take us with her to class. So I didn't know I was at a community college. I knew I was with my mom, you know, and she was sitting at a desk and I was, you know, told to play quietly. But when I think about that, and I think about today's students, and I think about what we learned with our tribal colleges as well, the majority of those students are also parenting students. And we know that what you mentioned about single parents, especially single mothers, brings about other elements in terms of what is it that you can do in any given day. Even if you want to prioritize your education, you've got to prioritize your children. And so when you ask about why this work is important for achieving the dream and why we've been doing it for a number of years, it's because we saw the data, but it's also because of, we have a program called our Dream Scholars, which you probably saw some of them at Dream. Many of our Dream Scholars are parents. Many of them are single parents, both single mothers and single fathers. And so we have this knowledge from the data, but we also have the knowledge from the students' lived experiences of just how important it is to support them. Without the support, they cannot attend classes. They cannot complete classes. And if I use one example from the scholars, we had one a few years ago, brilliant, brilliant student, but she had 5 kids. And in order for her to come for a week to spend time with us as a Dream Scholar, we had to work with her on the obvious. Who's going to care for your 5 kids while you're on this experiential learning opportunity that will help you and your family earn a job ultimately with living, sustaining wages? But we do need to deal with the now. And right now, you will be without childcare for X number of days. And so if I'm being really transparent and thinking about my mom and this student, it's the practical things in life that for some we might take for granted because we do have childcare or our kids are in daycare. But for many, that practical is a hurdle, right? They have to figure out, how are they going to get their kids to someone's house on public transportation and hope the bus is on time to get them to the community college so they'll be on time for class? And we know that that's the case for a good percentage of our students. And so that's the why behind the work.
Okay. You know, to be equal opportunists here. And I just thought about this, just, I was talking about it. But what about men? Do you have numbers, or are you aware of men who face actually the same issues, if you will?
I am. And so I can give you two examples of people that I actually know personally. One is a college president that was in a program with me, the Aspen Rising President's Fellowship Program, and was a single father and talked a lot about being a single father and trying to earn his education while taking care of his daughter.
Right.
We also have someone on our community college advisory group who is a Native student who is also a father and was working through his program at the same time that he was raising his child. And so I think it's so important to remember that a parenting student can be any gender and could or could not have a partner.
Right.
The circumstances around their lives are complicated, but what they all have in common is they've got a responsibility to this person that they're raising at the same time that they want to really get their education so that they can, in most cases, make a financial difference for not just themselves, for these kids. They want to show them that it can be done, but they also want them to realize, right, the benefits of this higher education, right? And for me, growing up with my mom and times being poverty impacted and on welfare, right? Are the lights getting turned off this month, or is the car going to be repossessed? Those kinds of questions are real for some of our students. And they're real for them and their children because they're watching all of this happen. And really, there's some concern and some anxiety around that. And at Achieving the Dream, we want to really help these students because we know it won't only help them and their families, it's also going to help their community. They'll be able to give back because they'll have jobs with living, sustaining wages. And this will also contribute to civic engagement and things that really help a community thrive.
Yeah, gosh, it's got me sitting here thinking, man, I really took a lot for granted as an undergraduate and graduate student. Um, I didn't have children to worry about. I didn't have bills to worry about. Either I was on scholarship or my parents were paying. So um, that is a lot that a lot of people don't think about. You think all you got to do is just go to class, but there are so many other factors. And that just leads me to think about me as an African American and the work that you guys do with Black students. And saw that you guys recently partnered with HCM strategist and Dr. Keith Curry, president of Compton College, who I might add is Diverse's 2024 Diverse Champion.
Yes.
And that's the work that he's doing and has been doing, with underprivileged and underrepresented students. He's going to be honored in our March 28th, 2024 edition of Diverse, and will be formally presented the award on Sunday, April 7th at the AACC conference in Louisville.
I will be
So yeah, he, along with a number of other leaders, I guess, are working with you guys, and you looking at reacting to the troubling data of the precipitous decline in Black learner enrollment. So the number of Black students of college has dropped. So what is the reason, first and foremost, of why you guys are seeing this decline?
That's a wonderful question. And I think that what we are really grappling with now is the why, so that we can solve for that why. But what we do know is that since 2011, colleges and universities have lost roughly 600,000 Black students. And half of those losses have been at a community college. So that partnership with HCM strategists and Dr. Keith Curry to really examine the data was profound, because looking at those numbers, having to swallow those numbers, having to digest those numbers is hard, but it's especially hard for Black people because part of our community, right, is about the power of education. And so to see that there's been such a decline over this last decade has caused leaders in Achieving the Dream, as well as Dr. Keith Curry and those of us that are working around this effort to increase not only the enrollment of Black students in higher education, but the enrollment of these Black students in programs that lead to living sustaining wages. Because the other part of the data is how many Black students leave college without a degree and a tremendous amount of debt. And so when we ask the question of why, right, some of the data shows us it's not necessarily because they've gotten jobs that are paying them without the degree or credential. It's not because they're enrolling in some other type of program. They're not coming to college. We're not coming to college. And that is something that we really, really seek to address. And if we're honest, there is conversation in the marketplace about the value of a degree, right? And so we can't ignore the chatter there. But we also can't ignore the statistics about the numbers of Black people who are living in poverty. And what we know to be the case through data is one of the most documented and researched ways out of being poverty impacted is through higher education that leads to a job with a higher paying wage. So I think the question for us is really, what are we doing about it? And what we're doing about it is we are working on something called the Alliance for Black Learner Excellence. We are really looking to partner with community colleges across the country that are showing a deep interest in supporting Black students and really looking at the factors that contribute to their success, right? So flip the narrative. What are successful Black students doing, and how do we replicate that? What kind of support is it that they need? What kind of an environment is it that they thrive? And really trying to understand the conditions for Black student excellence. And that's something that's really exciting for us. We're now in the process of a planning grant where we are collecting information from Black students and leaders in higher education that are doing things that are propelling Black students into success, as well as looking at the data that shows us if there are any trends into why students stop out of college. So we can look more at the data of who came and left than it is to figure out who never showed up. So it's really analyzing the data around what are some of the trends that we see and why these students stop out of education, but also looking at the data and those students that stay and that are ultimately successful. So it's an important initiative that we are really excited and looking forward to doing.
Okay, kind of begs the question for me, with the African-American enrollment decline, are you seeing that same decline, obviously probably not at the same level, in other groups, or are other groups rising? I mean, what does it look like for other marginalized
That's
groups?
a great question. So there's been a decline across the board. There's been a decline in men in particular. There's also been a decline in Latinx students as well. And so we have seen a decline. It's what I've called there's not the same type of college going culture that there was, right? There is less of a college going culture. And so we're seeing a decline in enrollment. What's interesting about that is that this data goes back to 2011. So it doesn't allow you to say that this is post-pandemic, right?
Right.
You really have to look at a lot of factors around higher education. Some of that is the cost of higher education when people look at the return on investment in terms of what you've paid for your degree versus what you earn with it. And that's why the work that we do in community colleges is so important, because a community college, it's local and it's affordable. And it's set up to support students with what they need inside and outside the classroom. And so when we see that half of those losses for Black students are at community colleges, we really have to step up and respond to the call. Because for some Black students, the community college is the pathway into higher education, period, right? And what we have to really look as a nation, but especially as an organization like Achieving the Dream, about what we can do to bring those students back to campus and to help them into social and economic communities where they have living sustaining wages and are fully contributed and fully protected, I would say, by society.
No, it's interesting you talking about people saying, is a degree worth it? And it just made me think about my father, who is an entrepreneur. So is his brothers. They all own their own businesses and things like that. But, he used to say, he used to ask me, he still asks me, even with his dementia, what is it you do for a living? Okay, did you need to go to school for that? Because what I'm hearing, I don't think you need to go to college for that. And
Yes,
so,
yes.
I'm sure people get that and hear that all the time, you know. Um, Whereas my mother, she went up to I guess almost all but dissertation. So we were
Mhm.
going to school, so that
Right,
wasn't an issue.
right.
But I can see how people could go down that road and not go to school or not enroll. And then it makes me think about those that are incarcerated. Is that part of the numbers? Because I was reading there that, I think you guys, not you guys, but just last year that the government is now allowing access to Pell Grants for people that are incarcerated for the first time in 30 years. What's happened in those 30 years? Gosh, I think we probably could do a show on that alone.
Yeah.
So, um, how do the principles of equity and justice inform your work and the work at Achieving a Dream?
Uh, so at my core,
Hmm.
I am Monica as a Black woman. Um, Equity and justice are who I am.
Right.
So, I was raised by a single mother, but also a single mother who got pregnant in high school. And so a lot of my developmental years were with my grandparents because I had a young mother.
Mhm.
And I had a grandfather who had a fifth grade education, grew up sharecropping in Mississippi and jumped a freight train, to come to the Northeast and figure it out. And so because he had a fifth grade education, he used to say, Monica, you have to make it with your books. It was his mantra because education was denied. Yet
Mhm.
in my family, not everyone, really was going to do what grandpa said. Everyone tried college, but, it was
Mhm.
something that, and going back to what your father told you, it was, well, if I can make this money doing this work and I don't have to really go to school and sacrifice all this time, why wouldn't I do that? And so I do think that um, when you go back and you think about equity and justice and why we do this work, um, there is a part that all communities have to reckon with when it comes to not having an education where they can speak to their needs in society. So,
Mhm.
what are the consequences of not being able to speak your legal needs and know your Miranda rights? What are the
Right.
consequences of not demanding a second opinion when you go to the doctor's office, right? What are the
Mm.
consequences of not knowing that you can't just be put out of any dwelling without notice? And so I bring this up to say that education matters. I am a proponent of higher education, but I
Mhm.
don't discount the education that people get from other ways of knowing, kind of what I mentioned about tribal colleges and universities.
Mhm.
And so the equity and justice part of it, to me, it's so important because without education and without knowing what your rights are or what the consequences of rights that have been denied for generations, as a Native American or as an African American or, whatever the case may be, you're not able to access society in the ways that are going to protect you and your family.
Preach. That's all I can say on that.
Thank you.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
oh my gosh, I won't get into it, but yes, by having education and knowing the rights, getting second opinions, I mean, that has
Mhm.
impacted my life and family um, so much in recent years. So, no, you're dead on it in that regard. Um, so with Achieving the Dream, the aspirations that you guys have for supporting the justice impacted community. Um, why, I think you alluded to it, but what else are you guys hoping to achieve with that work besides the
Yeah.
obvious, yes?
So I did allude to it. And one of the things that I would say, so I've had kind of an interesting life. I mentioned my mom was
Mhm.
a single mother and a young mother. But my mom also worked in juvenile detention homes. And up until the time that she retired, she was actually a prison guard. And so I sometimes would go to these juvenile detention homes with her, again, childcare being an issue. So I kind of grew up understanding that people could get in trouble and still be good people. It was just,
right.
That's what happens when you go to group homes and you see people of all ages that have to, they're restricted, but they're in a home where there's, someone like my mom who was, trying to get a degree in criminal justice, trying to help them. And so when I think about justice impacted community, those that are incarcerated, and I think about, what you said, as of July 1st, they can use their Pell funding to get an education. And we know that if they get an education, it's likely to reduce recidivism rates. It's also going to allow them to come out into the community where we should be investing in reentry programs, right? That'll allow them to have an opportunity to get a job, which not only supports the community in terms of community vibrancy and vitality, it also lowers the recidivism rate. And we do not want to create revolving doors in our prison system. And so thinking about community colleges and how you can stretch your dollars and your Pell funding, we do have community colleges that have kind of robust programs that are supporting students who are incarcerated. And, just one example, Milwaukee Area Technical College, they provide distance learning to prisons in Alaska, Hawaii, Louisiana, Maine, Minnesota. And we have community colleges that have specific programs, one that I worked at, where we are actually going into the detention center or the prison or the jail, whatever the situation is, and providing that education. And I think that's a part of the community college mission, right? You want to increase access for all students, many of whom would not have had an entry into higher education without this. And that certainly includes those that are justice impacted.
Right.
So it's an important part of the work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So to that end, you guys are definitely standing behind that work and supporting it. You guys are hosting May 1st through the 2nd, 2024, a virtual Equity and Justice Institute. So with this institute, who should attend this and what should they expect?
Yes, so this is our first Equity and Justice Institute. We have done equity institutes in the past where we have focused on different dimensions of equity, but the team really wanted to look at justice in general, right? What does social justice look like? What does racial justice look like? But they also wanted to look at justice impacted. And so they are really excited to offer a program to, I would say primarily, these are for practitioners who are dealing with those for whom social justice has been an issue, right? And what does that mean, right? So justice impacted, there are conditions that lead to folks being incarcerated. And, it's not for you or I probably to impact what all of those conditions are. But we want to talk about this collective group of people that can still give back to society and deserve a second chance. And if we're going to support them in that effort, what are these programs look like so that they are leaving incarceration ready to contribute to society in a meaningful way and to not return, to the system, if you will. And so looking at programs that are doing that work really well, there are some across the country that are offering scholarships. They've partnered with local employers. They have programs that are from the day that you get released, you get connected to someone who's going to help you register for classes, help you get a part-time job, help you transfer if that's a part of your opportunity, and then help you ultimately, have the career that you're looking for. And so that's part of the programming. But we'll also be talking to students and practitioners who are really dealing with what's happening in their states around equity, justice, and inclusion, and how that's impacting the ways in which they're learning or the ways that they're experiencing higher education.
Right.
And we also want to provide support to those that are partnering with community colleges and with students and with state agencies, local agencies, volunteers, nonprofits, to really increase social and economic mobility for particular populations. And so That's our Equity and Justice Institute. Student affairs folks on campuses, community partners, those that are involved in collective impact, those that are working at nonprofits, but those who are really interested in kind of that justice movement where you're seeking to contribute to society by helping those that are the most vulnerable.
So you're really putting the community, if you will, in community college here.
Yes.
With this for certain. Which makes me think about, which I'm not sure if they're part of this or not, you can let us know, but I feel like probably the biggest roadblock for this may be, when I say roadblock, for ultimate success for prisoners to get an education and reduce recidivism, et cetera. You got to have the involvement of the prison officials and educators. So are they going to be part of this audience or group, or how do you see that being attacked, if you will?
Yes, they will. And so
Okay.
I love the part about getting the community involved, because one of the things that will be a part of our Equity and Justice Institute is one of our community colleges runs a free expungement clinic as part of their paralegal program, which is a great example of how you help your community, get on and stay on their feet. And so there'll be strategies that are shared if you want to, create an expungement clinic on your community college campus or somewhere in your community. So yes, those people will be a part of it. We also have some partners that have done some research around some of the best practices or high impact practices in supporting learners that are incarcerated. So that will certainly be a part of it. And we also have folks that are going to be talking about programs that are on their campuses that support particular student populations. And so we're really looking forward to being able to do that. And one other thing I want to mention is also really thinking about the mental health aspect of it. You have had a trauma-informed life, right?
Right.
Not only do you need the physical and the economic support, you also need the emotional and the mental support in order to really continue to live and engage in a society as a whole healthy individual. So that'll also be part of the Equity and Justice Institute.
Okay. Okay. You guys have done a lot and are doing a lot. So you mentioned earlier, you guys started in 2004. So that's 20 years of serving the higher education community. And I think I mentioned earlier, we're diverse. We're at our 40th year of serving the same community. I'm really starting to feel old because I've been here for, I think, 33 of those years. Wow. But when I look back, I feel like some of the things that we were covering and looking at when I started here are the same. In fact, in a lot of regards, I really feel like we have regressed, honestly, that we're not better off today than we were 40 years ago in higher ed and in this country. But that leads me to talking about the equity toolkit that you guys have available to institution.
Yes.
That is helping them to operationalize equity. And it's based on 8 core principles.
Yes.
And I really enjoyed reading about how this tool was utilized at Chattanooga State Community College. At the same time I was reading it, I was like, okay, man, well, at least it appeared to me that the lead practitioner there was the chief diversity officer. And I'm like, man, well, how much longer is he going to have his job, to even continue this work? But I was glad to see that or know that, in Tennessee, that the efforts to ban DEI work actually failed in their legislature earlier this month. So it doesn't mean they won't try again later, but at least the work can continue. But for those that are interested in the toolkit, can you tell us about, I guess, a little bit about those 8 core principles and why you guys created the tool to start with?
Great. So as part of our work at Achieving the Dream, we disseminate resources into the field so that folks that are involved in this work have resources that they can use. And we really try to focus on practitioners and making the resources accessible. And we have a number of toolkits, but the equity toolkit, which we recently released, the framework around this are these 8 equity principles. And these 8 equity principles are really connected to our equity statement and our understanding of what it means to be equity minded. And so our principles around developing an equity mindset, something I talked about earlier, you have to interrogate practices and structures and policies to understand what are the ramifications and the consequences of something you've maybe done for 30 years on a particular student population when you didn't think about how that implication on this group has adversely affected the student's ability to complete. So that's one of our principles. Another one is embracing cultural competence and culturally responsive pedagogy. And I talk a little bit about that with TCUs and a little bit with, my community and your community as an African American, right? That rich history around education because it was denied to us as a byproduct of slavery. And so there's a cultural component to education. We also talk a little bit today about data without knowing who your students are and examining your data from a cultural lens so that you can understand how it impacts specific students, such as student parents or students who are multi-language users who may or may not, have their documentation in this country. We also talk about power sharing, and that can be a little bit tricky because a lot of what we know about racism and microaggressions and biases are around who has the power and who's used that power to oppress.
Right.
We also really want to talk about strategies for bringing the local community and partnerships into this work so we can increase economic vitality for everyone, but especially for those that have been marginalized. And then lastly, this last principle, and this is the one that's sometimes tricky, especially in certain parts of the country, which is acknowledging the pervasiveness of racism and discrimination. You have to name it to solve for it. And so being able to have safe conversations with our colleges around, well, what's happening in your community around race? And it could be any particular population depending upon where you live, right? And how do we get at those conversations in a way that we can be honest about how those biases may unintentionally, most of the time, impact your students? And so the equity toolkit is essentially unpacking these 8 equity principles, giving examples of how colleges have used them and how they can continue to use the toolkit and the support of Achieving the Dream, to create an environment where all students feel like they belong, that they can thrive, that they're seen, valued, and heard.
Okay. No, that's good. You compacted a lot there in a few words, so I appreciate that because we are getting close to the end here. And like I say, you guys just are completing or in your 20th year. We're in our 40th year. Just let's say in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, what would you see as the crowning achievement or goal that Achieving the Dream wants to reach?
Wow, that's such a great question and something we were thinking about when we were preparing for our 20th anniversary. I think that Achieving the Dream, we're looking at community colleges as really the anchor of the community. And so what we'll be focusing on now and into the immediate and distant future is really this understanding of community vibrancy. There's a part of that is familiar, but there's also a part of that now that is innovative, right? So how are you defining community, right? In some instances, community, it's the people that live within a certain mile radius around one another. But there's also, depending upon if you're a rural institution or a TCU, that community is vast and deep and it's wide, right? And so the community vibrancy part of this in terms of the partnerships that you need with your pre or your K through 12 or K through college pipeline to ensure that there is a college going community that reaps the benefits of being socially and economically mobile. There's the partnerships that are going to be required with local employers to ensure that this education and credentialing leads to a job. There's the partnership with social organizations to make sure that all groups are protected, understood, and are valued. And so what does that look like for members of the community that might not have access for a number of different reasons? That could be, the result of systemic racism or some other kind of phobia. And so I would say the future for us is that community vibrancy, really ensuring that every member of the community has access to an education, a quality education that allows them to take care of themselves and their families and helps them contribute to their local community.
No, thank you. I was going to, my last thing I was going to ask you was to give you the last word, but I think that is the last word. Unless you got something else you want to add to it, but that, no, that definitely encapsulates where I hope we are in the future. So.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. And like I said, like a homecoming, given where I started with Frank Matthews and George Mason. And so I really appreciate the conversation.
All right. No, thank you. Thank you, Monica, and officially Dr. Trent.